Wednesdays are for people's elbows, super kicks, and springboard cutters. You know what that means. It's the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast hosted by Michael Davis on Boom Broadcasting, and it's time to pick up that mic. Saturday night's main event is this weekend. We'll be previewing that today on the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast, as well as talking a little bit about this transfer window that is just lingering around WWE programming. But I have to start out with Tony Khan and All Elite Wrestling. A few years ago, when AEW began, Vince McMahon was notorious for holding on to unused talent who were requesting their release and wanted to actually compete and wrestle. And Vince McMahon caught a lot of flack for that. Rightfully so. These are men and women who want to compete. They're not being used at their current workplace, and they just want to go for better opportunity. And Vince McMahon, in the spirit of competition, would not allow their release. This meant that Jon Moxley, formerly known as Dean Ambrose, or Brody Lee, formerly known as Luke Harper, the Revival, now known as FTR, they were not allowed out of their contracts because Vince McMahon didn't want them going to the competition. Now the roles are reversed 5 years later, and Tony Khan is holding AEW wrestlers hostage, and I don't think this is right. Now, of course, you've signed them to a contract. They are technically yours. You can do whatever you see fit to do. That is Tony Khan right now. But you have so much talent. Personally, I believe your roster is bloated. I mean, if you look at all of the wrestlers, if you go on a really good source I use is the SmackDown Hotel, and it's about 98% accurate. If you look at all the men, all the women, the announcers, you have over 200 employees on screen at your disposal. And you're not using some of your key talent. I mean, Britt Baker, there was a report earlier this week that Britt Baker is just sitting at home because Tony Khan doesn't want to book her. So he's just going to let her contract run out. Malakai Black, for a little over a year, has expressed frustration at some time for not being used in the way that he deserves to be used. I feel like the only time that Malakai Black, who, by the way, was underused in WWE, Paul Heyman recognized that when he was trying to be the creative over Monday Night Raw. Vince McMahon, I don't know what he didn't see in Aleister Black, but when he became Malakai Black and came to AEW, he feuded with Cody, and you're like, okay, they are going to set him up for something big. And then there was nothing. And then there was the House of Black with him and Buddy Matthews and Brody King, and you bring in Julia Hart. And the next time I remember him having a legitimate singles feud was last year for the TNT Championship against Adam Copeland. And of course, that was the steel cage match where Copeland got injured and Malakai Black didn't win the match. But that was the last time I remember Malakai Black actually having a legitimate singles run. And now that, some of his friends are going to WWE, his wife is there. I mean, Malakai Black wants to go back. And Tony Khan's like, no. Well, you look at the rest of the roster. Where is Wardlow? Wardlow would be phenomenal in WWE, but he's not being used in AEW. You had the MJF feud that you were like, okay, now is his big push, and then nothing. And then you put him back as the muscle of the Undisputed Kingdom. And then you're teasing a little rift between him and Adam Cole, and then nothing. And it keeps cycling. But you have so much talent. You have so much talent on this roster. Where's Phoenix, right? I mean, Phoenix is literally getting to sit home with his contract and not be used. Phoenix is one of the most talented, if not the most talented, luchadors in wrestling today. And you could make the argument he is one of the most talented in-ring wrestlers, period. Ricky Starks appears at an independent event and cuts a promo on Tony Khan not using him. You know, he's saying he's 34 years old, he's in good shape, and he's not being used. And a lot of people, and these aren't just, okay, these are headaches backstage, or, hey, this guy isn't really that good. But when you're putting QT Marshall on television and you have the likes of Rey Fenix, Ricky Starks, Wardlow, Malakai Black just sitting at home, Britt Baker, what do we expect? Miro's another one. Miro, I remember him coming in. He wasn't used to his full potential in WWE when Vince was there, with Rusev Day being a huge hit. And he comes in as Miro. He comes in with the Kip Sabian angle, the best man, if you will. Had a dominant TNT title run, and then what? Nothing. Until his wife, you know, who would then be separated with Miro and Andrade and that angle. And then Andrade just leaves because his contract's over. And again, Miro has nothing to do. And that was a year ago. That was a year ago, guys. How do you have so much talent on your roster and you don't know how to use them? You don't want to use them. So in my personal opinion, in my perspective, I understand if you don't want these talent going to the other show. Okay? Well, here's what you do. You use them on your show. You use them. If you think they are so valuable that they are going to move the needle for WWE, then you use them while they are under contract. That's what you're going to do. That's what you need to do. And there was a while where it was like, okay, if WWE talent are being misused, they can go to AEW and be used correctly. And if you were in AEW, there was a little bit of a fear if you had went to WWE at some point that you were going to be misused. Cody Rhodes, again, the Forbidden Door himself, was the one who helped instrument AEW in the first place. He basically broke through another Forbidden Door, being the first AEW wrestler to jump into the WWE world again because of his first stint there. And Cody would 2 years later dethrone Roman Reigns and the greatest modern day world title reign ever in any company. That's what Cody Rhodes did. And ever since then, you get your Jade Cargill, you get this one, you get that one, you get Ethan Page for NXT, so on and so forth. And you're like, oh, especially now that Triple H is here, maybe it is the destination to be. WWE breaking records at an all-time high, Netflix deal, 3 hours of SmackDown on USA, NXT and their partnership with TNA that I broke on fansfirstsports.com earlier last week. All this stuff comes into play, and especially when you see Penta and how he's presented in WWE. There is no mistake that Triple H made allowing that footage. If you haven't seen it, this footage shows Triple H planning out and strategizing Penta's entrance in his debut last week. How does that footage get leaked on the internet? It's backstage, or actually, it's in the arena hours before the show, and you have your chief content officer, the man in charge, Triple H, figuring out the best way to present Penta as a star. You have his merchandise drop on WWEshop.com, around the same time that AEW pulled Phoenix's merchandise, and Phoenix is still contracted there in AEW. And here's why I believe Triple H wanted that leaked, is because he's saying, hey, if we got Penta, we got Phoenix. It's just a matter of time. But look at these other guys: Miro, Malakai Black, Wardlow, Ricky Starks, Britt Baker. And you start going down that list and you're like, if you come over here, I am determined to make you a star. Because for the longest time, Vince McMahon held a grudge against WCW. If you were a WCW guy and you came to WWE, you had to scratch and claw your way through the card into the show. And that's not the case here. Penta being showcased very, very well against Chad Gable, against Pete Dunne. And he's showcasing his talent and not squash matches, but showing that he can hang with some of the best athletes and entertainers in WWE. And Triple H said, hey, I will make Penta look like a star, just like anyone who comes over here. I will give you a fair chance to become a WWE superstar. I feel that was very strategic for Triple H. And Tony Khan, the way you combat this is you're like, okay, let's sit down and talk with Wardlow. Let's sit down and talk with Ricky Starks. Let's sit down and talk with these people so they don't jump ship. Because if you start losing, I named off several guys. I didn't name off, Evil Uno, Brandon Cutler, Captain Sean Dean, and no disrespect to any of these guys. I didn't name off JD Drake. I didn't name off Kiera Hogan. I didn't name off Mason Madden. I didn't name off guys who were lower on the card. All due respect to those people. I named people who could go to another company and be in the main event in 6 to 12 months. Let me be honest. I named guys you need to be using. And Tony Khan's not. And he's messing this up. And you might as well say there needs to be a transfer window for AEW and WWE to avoid this. But there is a transfer window in WWE right now. You've seen talent over the course of the last month or so, appear on Raw, appear on SmackDown, apparently is talking to the different general managers about switching shows. And I feel like this is about to run its course. Now, I understand why they did it. USA had Monday Night Raw, and now they have SmackDown. SmackDown used to be on Fox, and that was the big money maker. And now it's Netflix who hosts Monday Night Raw. And so you want your bigger investor the happiest, right? You want them to have the bigger stars. That's why you had the debut Monday Night Raw on Netflix. That is why you had all the things, right? You had Roman Reigns, Solo Sikoa, mainly a SmackDown feud. You had that be the blow off on Monday Night Raw rather than both of their homes on SmackDown. You had this one, you had that one. And I get it and I understand it. But here's the point where we're entering the Royal Rumble. We're going into WrestleMania season. And you have to solidify what stories you want. You need a deadline in this. Just like college football needs some parameters around their transfer window and their transfer portal, WWE needs the same. That all rosters will be locked on February 2nd, the day after the Royal Rumble. They need a parameter that, only these people can, change brands if they want to. If you've appeared on a show before, that is your declaration of eligibility in the transfer window. You need that. And I feel like WWE has lacked putting parameters around this transfer window. Bayley was showing up for weeks, and now she's finally a member of the Monday Night Raw roster. The Wyatt Six hasn't shown up in quite some time, actually, since the Karrion Kross, Miz, AOP storyline with the Final Testament. And all of a sudden, there's an announcement that they're moved to the SmackDown roster. Where are they? You have Nia Jax showing up. Okay. Is she moving to Monday Night Raw? Okay. Is Roxanne Perez, who has shown up on Raw and SmackDown, is she going to get the call up? You have several different people that are just showing up or competing randomly. And I'm just like, okay, are we getting Monday Night Raw for them? Are we getting Friday Night SmackDown for them? You need parameters around this transfer window, especially when you think we are going into Saturday night's main event this weekend. And last time it was good. The presentation was impeccable. And I was a big advocate for the way they present Saturday night's main event. But there wasn't a lot to ride home about. It was a fun pay-per-view, very good in-ring storytelling, but very predictable. Is this as predictable? And I will go ahead and say Rhea Ripley versus Nia Jax for the Women's World Championship is predictable. Rhea Ripley just won her title back. Her title came back to mommy. On the Raw Netflix debut against Liv Morgan, Nia Jax just lost the WWE Women's Championship in a cash-in to Tiffany Stratton. Don't know why they're not continuing that feud with Nia Jax and Tiffany Stratton, but instead Nia's going after Rhea's title. Doesn't make sense to me, especially when you build up a story that would blow off in a Nia versus Tiffany feud. Unless you want to keep both of these women heel and you're like, hey, Nia will definitely be booed like last year in Australia, the Elimination Chamber against Rhea Ripley. This is obvious. Rhea Ripley wins this one. Nia Jax, I personally would like her to stay on SmackDown. I don't think she's a big enough star for Monday Night Raw on Netflix. I believe she should stay on SmackDown. And speaking of SmackDown, the feud, Braun Strowman, Jacob Fatu, the Samoan werewolf, versus the Monster Among Men. This is Jacob Fatu's first singles premium live event. This is huge. This is big for Jacob Fatu. And I just remember when they needed Bronson Reed to get over. You know who they put him up against? They put him up against Braun Strowman. You can just imagine there's going to be destruction, devastation, carnage all around ringside. There is going to be a broken barrier. There is going to be a broken table. I mean, these guys might even go into a double count out or a double DQ or, referee stoppage. I could see any of those scenarios happening. But if it doesn't, it's pretty obvious Jacob Fatu wins this match. I don't know where they go with Solo Sikoa and his version of the bloodline. I don't know where that goes. But you notice when Roman lost the undisputed WWE World Championship at WrestleMania last year, Solo Sikoa decided to take over. Now, I wonder if, hear me out, Solo Sikoa lost to Ulafala and lost his spot at the head of the table on Raw on its Netflix debut. Maybe Jacob Fatu. Maybe Jacob Fatu, who is now known as the enforcer of the bloodline, just like Solo was for Roman. Maybe Jacob Fatu decides that Solo wasn't the guy to take over for Roman. It's the Samoan werewolf. And so that should be something you keep your eyes on here in the coming months, that dynamic between Jacob Fatu and Solo, and see if he really does love Solo. And there is a crowd favorite who people would love to see win the World Heavyweight Championship. It might only be a matter of time, but it's Jey Uso main eventing, yeeting all over the place against the ring general Gunther. Now, I was looking and I was like, I'm a little split, right? I'm a little split. because Jey Uso is really over. What are you setting up for WrestleMania? Are you wanting the title on Gunther for WrestleMania? I don't think they really want it on Jey Uso going into WrestleMania, but it could be a transition where Jey Uso at least has a world championship to his name and you get it on whoever you want. So if Gunther wins this match, it tells me he is in the plans to defend the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania a year after he lost his record-setting Intercontinental Championship to Sami Zayn. Now, speaking of Sami Zayn, he's had a few opportunities at the world title, and it's always that feel-good moment. There's always that false finish or 2 or 3 that happens that makes you look like, I actually thought it was going to happen. This is the scenario that plays out for Jey Uso, unfortunately, for Mr. Main Event himself. They needed somebody who was going to put butts in seats a week before the Royal Rumble. They needed somebody who could almost be believable to dethrone a world champion. Jey Uso's been in this position before with Roman Reigns, and some people actually believed he would win. Now that he's established as main event Jey Uso and has the crowd behind him, he might be the perfect person to go to sleep against Gunther. This title's not changing. Gunther will win. He will retain. And that tells me he will go into WrestleMania as your World Heavyweight Champion. But there wasn't a title change last time. Yeah, there was the inaugural Women's United States Champion crown in Chelsea Green, but there wasn't a title change. This match has your best chance of a title change. The Intercontinental Championship, Braun Breaker defending against Sheamus. Now, there's been a little bit of hot potato when it comes to Braun Breaker and the Intercontinental Championship. There has been. Braun Breaker won the Intercontinental Championship from Sami Zayn and then would later drop it to, who did we just talk about? Main event Jey Uso. And that was very short-lived. Braun Breaker held it 51 days before Jey Uso won it. And then 4 weeks later, Braun Breaker got his championship back. Thanks to the Bloodline. That was obviously to advance the Bloodline story. And now Braun Breaker has held it over 90 days since October. As a matter of fact, yesterday was the 3-month mark of his title reign. I could see a scenario where Braun Breaker holds this championship to WrestleMania, where John Cena may not win the Royal Rumble. He may not win the Elimination Chamber. And John Cena actually wins the Intercontinental Championship for the first time in his career. I could see that. I could see that entirely. You have John Cena, Braun Breaker wrestling each other for the first time ever at WrestleMania. You put over a younger star, or you give John Cena the title that's eluded him, where he'd probably have an Intercontinental Championship open challenge. I could totally see that scenario. But there's somebody else who the Intercontinental Championship has eluded him for years. Years. And it's the Intercontinental Championship. And Sheamus has had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and he's yet to claim this championship. But I believe it can happen. I believe it can happen, and it could very well happen this time around. And it's noted. And I would love to be fact-checked on this. If Rick 8-Bit's listening or somebody else who knows their stuff, I would love to hear. But when you look at all the accolades in WWE, at least those active, Sheamus would have them all. He's won the tag titles. He has won the United States title. He won the World Heavyweight title. He was WWE champion, but he was also King of the Ring, Money in the Bank, the Royal Rumble winner. This is the only active accolade that's eluded Sheamus, and I think he would be the first one to have all of those accolades. So it'd be very special if Sheamus could win the Intercontinental title. He doesn't even have to hold it that long, but he could win it and make history. And that is how I believe Saturday night's main event goes. Rhea and Gunther retain. Jacob Fatu shows out, and Sheamus is your new Intercontinental Champion. Those are the first times you'll hear those words officially. But that is your episode for the Drop the Mic Wrestling podcast. We appreciate you guys listening. Drop your Saturday night's main event comments down below. And if this is your first time watching Boom Broadcasting, we'd love your support. And the entire team would by subscribing. It's free. And it just shows the appreciation for our team. But guys, I appreciate you all so much. And remember, don't drop the mic. And we'll catch you guys here next time.